Don Airey is not a name that usually appears on posters. He does not step into the spotlight with the stance of a rock god. He is not attached to an iconic image that makes audiences chant his name in stadiums. But if you have ever heard the classic intros of hard rock and heavy metal, you have heard him, even if you did not know it. When the opening notes of Mr. Crowley ring out, the music does not simply begin. It constructs a space, a sequence of Baroque-colored arpeggios, cold and solemn, like an echo inside an ancient cathedral. Before Ozzy Osbourne's voice, before the guitar, there was already a hand laying the foundation for that atmosphere. Then, in another era, Since You've Been Gone opens with a brighter, sharper energy. A moment when rock shifts toward a more radio-friendly age, while still retaining the necessary weight. And later, Perfect Strangers brings a sense of maturity, restraint, and control, as if the band itself had passed through years of chaos to rediscover its own structure. 3 songs, 3 different moments, 3 essential fragments in the history of rock. Most listeners remember the vocals. They remember the guitars. They remember the frontmen and guitarists standing in the light. But very few stop to ask, who created the foundation that made those moments solid? Don Airey was always there, in the studio with Ritchie Blackmore, where perfection was not a choice, but a requirement, in Ozzy's recordings steeped in darkness, and later, when he stepped into Deep Purple to replace Jon Lord, a position that was not merely a job, but an entire legacy. He does not seek the spotlight. He seeks precision. In a rock world full of egos and conflict, Don Airey chose a different role, the one who holds the structure, the one who ensures that everything stands. Not through display, but through discipline, technique, and a profound understanding of music. And sometimes, it is precisely those who do not stand at the center who keep the entire architecture of history from collapsing. Don Airey was born in 1948 in Sunderland, in the northeast of England, a region not known for artistic glamour, but for work discipline and practicality. But his path did not begin in the noisy bars of rock, nor did it come from garage bands. He entered music through the classical door. Airey studied at the University of Nottingham, then went on to receive formal training at the Royal Northern College of Music, an environment where Bach, Beethoven, and contrapuntal structure mattered more than any guitar riff. There, he did not simply learn how to play an instrument. He learned how to construct music, harmony, counterpoint, structure, how a theme is developed and transformed, how a climax is prepared long before it finally explodes. The most important thing was not finger technique, but thinking. Don Airey was not a keyboardist who learned rock in bars and gradually refined himself on stage. He entered the rock world with the mindset of a classical composer. While many viewed keyboards in rock as mere accompaniment or effects, he saw the architecture behind them. His abilities quickly set him apart. He could sight read almost instantly, reading and performing a complex piece of music without long preparation. In the studio, that meant something invaluable: speed and precision. When a producer needed to try a new idea, Airey did not spend hours searching. He played immediately. He could improvise without breaking structure. He could move fluidly from the Hammond organ tones steeped in the 1970s to the modern synthesizer layers of the 1980s without losing identity. To him, this was not a change of style, but a change of language within the same system of thought. That classical foundation did not distance him from rock. On the contrary, it allowed him to understand rock far more deeply than many assumed. He knew when to remain silent, when a minor chord could darken the atmosphere, when a background organ layer could lift the guitar higher without competing with it. A person like that does not need to chase the lights. He does not wait for the spotlight. He waits for the call. And when the phone rings from a demanding guitarist, a singer rebuilding a career, or a band needing to replace a legend, Don Airey is always ready. In the late 1970s, the phone truly rang. This time, on the other end of the line was Rainbow, the band led by one of the most controlling and demanding guitarists in rock, Ritchie Blackmore. Joining Rainbow was not merely a job, it was stepping into a storm. Blackmore was notorious for constantly changing lineups and for standards in the studio that were almost unforgiving. There was no room for fragile egos and no tolerance for lack of preparation. Every note had to serve the structure he envisioned. Don Airey entered that environment not as an artist seeking fame, but as someone who understood systems. He did not try to compete with the guitar. He did not try to prove himself as the center. He read what Blackmore wanted and responded with precision. The album Down to Earth marked a transitional phase for Rainbow, Cheetah moving toward a sharper, more modern hard rock sound. Within tightly constructed riffs and a clear radio-oriented direction, Airey's keyboards were not flamboyant. They were sharp, concise, supporting the rhythm and highlighting the spaces between guitar strikes. Blackmore liked control. Airey understood survival. He knew when to push and when to pull back. He knew that in a band like Rainbow, survival did not come from being the most prominent, but from being the most reliable. But the real challenge did not stop there. In 1980, another door opened, darker, more ominous. Ozzy Osbourne had just left Black Sabbath and was trying to rebuild his career from scratch. His debut album, Blizzard of Oz, was not merely a recording project. It was a declaration of survival. Metal was entering a period that was darker in tone, more dramatic, heavier. And then, a fateful moment appeared. The intro to Mr. Crowley, a sequence of arpeggios breathing Baroque air, Gothic church overtones, classical yet sinister. The chords rang out like echoes from an ancient cathedral before the guitar and vocals shattered the silence. In just a few seconds, the keyboard constructed the entire atmosphere of the song, not as background, but as a gateway. It became one of the most famous keyboard intros in the history of metal. And most listeners, even after hearing it hundreds of times, still do not know the name of the person who played those notes. Don Airey did not stand at the center of the stage when the song was performed. He did not attach his name to the image of a madman or a guitar hero, but he did something more important. He created the moment. In Rainbow, he learned how to survive within control. In Blizzard of Oz, he helped build the atmosphere for a new era of metal. And all of it happened without him ever needing to step into the spotlight. After Rainbow and Blizzard of Oz, Don Airey did not follow the familiar path of an artist who had just made a major mark. He did not seek a band to settle into as a long-term symbol. He chose a more difficult position, the position of someone who must constantly adapt, yet is never allowed to alter anyone else's identity. He became the man standing behind some of the greatest guitars in rock. In Whitesnake, where everything revolves around the voice, image, and personality of David Coverdale. Keyboards are not the central element. Here, Airey understood his role very clearly. Not to impose a personal signature, but to keep the song structures full and grounded when the guitars surge into their climactic moments. His layers of organ and synthesizer do not call for attention. They function as invisible foundations, filling the space between rhythm and melody, ensuring that solos are never left exposed. In Whitesnake, Airey did not make the music more complex. He made it more stable, so that the emotion of guitar and vocal could rise higher without collapsing. With Gary Moore, the challenge took on an entirely different character. Moore was the kind of guitarist who played with raw emotion, solos like an electric current without perfect insulation. Here, the keyboard could not take space, but it could not disappear either. Airey acted as a balancing axis. He used chords to keep emotion from drifting too far, used structure to ensure that explosive solos still had a point of support. His keyboard did not lead Gary Moore. It kept Moore from falling away from himself. When working with Judas Priest, the space became even more unforgiving. This was a band built on cold steel riffs, precise rhythm, and the mechanical weight of metal. Keyboards, if placed incorrectly, could destroy that entire identity. Airey understood this. He did not soften metal. He did not add unnecessary color. His keyboards appeared only when depth needed to be expanded, creating a sense of greater space and density, while preserving the sharpness and discipline of Judas Priest. Here, his presence was measured by feeling, not by the number of notes played. And in live performances with Black Sabbath, where every song carries the weight of history, Airey had to play yet another role: respecting legacy. He did not attempt to leave a personal imprint in a world already so clearly defined, while he ensured that the musical structure remained solid when the band stepped onto the stage, especially in live moments, where every deviation is magnified. What is the common thread across all these environments? Don Airey does not occupy the stage. He does not compete with the guitar. He does not turn the keyboard into a display of technique. He does something far more subtle. He lifts the guitar higher. His style has unmistakable classical roots, not in flamboyance, but in controlled thinking. He understands that every chord must have a resin to exist. Every background layer must serve the whole. The sound may be modern, but structure always comes first. Don Airey understands a core truth that many in rock overlook. The keyboard does not exist to compete with the guitar. It exists to expand the sky behind the guitar. And when that sky is wide enough, solos can truly fly, not through noise, but through a solid foundation that audiences rarely see. In 2002, a void opened in the history of Deep Purple, not merely a vacancy in the lineup, but the loss of a part of the band's sonic architecture. Jon Lord stepped away. For Deep Purple, this was not simply a personnel change. It was the end of an era. Jon Lord was not just a keyboardist. He was the one who defined how the organ conversed with the guitar, how classical music merged with hard rock, how a band could be both heavy and architecturally deep. Replacing him meant stepping into the shadow of a legacy every audience member knew by heart. The pressure was absolute. Anyone stepping into that role faced two familiar wrong choices: either trying to copy Jon Lord or deliberately cutting all ties with the past. Don Airey chose a third path, more difficult, but far more sustainable. He did not imitate. He did not try to become Jon Lord version 2. Airey understood that Deep Purple did not need a replica. The band needed someone to keep the structure alive. So he preserved what belonged to Purple's soul. The Hammond organ sound, the classical mindset, the sense of dialogue between keyboard and guitar. But he did not freeze them in the past. What he added was the speed of a new era, the flexibility of a session musician accustomed to every studio and every personality, and above all, stability. Something Deep Purple had lacked for decades due to constant lineup changes and internal conflict. Airey's keyboards in Deep Purple did not attempt to recreate the organ-guitar battles of the 1970s. The role shifted. It kept the space open, clear, and precise, allowing the band to continue moving forward without denying its own past. The crucial point is this: Deep Purple did not collapse after Jon Lord. On the contrary, the band entered its longest and most stable era since the 1970s. Not because they found a new icon, but because they found someone who understood that legacy does not need to be displayed. It needs to be maintained. Don Airey did not enter Deep Purple to rewrite history. He entered to keep history functioning. And in a band that had survived so many storms, that very quietness became the decisive factor. Don Airey has never become a name associated with scandal. There were no noisy breakups, no shocking statements, no backstage myths cultivated to feed an image. In the world of rock, that is almost unusual. He is remembered for standards that rock rarely celebrates: punctuality, precision, and the ability to understand a song faster than any ego in the room. When others need time to find the feeling, Airey is already ready to play. Not because he lacks emotion, but because he knows exactly where emotion resides within the structure. In the studio, his value does not lie in the number of notes played. It lies in speed of decision-making, in the ability to read a complex chart, grasp the intention within minutes, and then deliver a solution that makes the entire room nod. For Airey, professionalism is not coldness. It is respect for everyone's time. Rock has always been full of ego. Major bands often function as collections of strong personalities, where every decision can become a conflict. In that context, Airey chose a rare position: the person who does not raise the temperature of the room. He does not need to win arguments. He lets the music answer for itself. When the guitar needs support, he steps back. When space needs to be expanded, he steps forward. When the song needs silence, he knows exactly when to stop. These are skills rarely acknowledged on stage, yet they determine whether a project runs smoothly or falls apart. And for that reason, Don Airey's phone has continued to ring across decades, regardless of trends that come and go. Not because he is always the most prominent, but because he is always the most reliable. Within the community of musicians, there exist titles that are never printed on album covers or awarded at ceremonies. They are passed by word of mouth, from one studio to another. Don Airey is spoken of as one of the greatest session rock keyboardists of all time. Not because he dominates the stage, but because he makes every stage function. When rock history needs someone to arrive at the right moment, play the right role, and not complicate things beyond necessity, Don Airey is there. And when the work is done, he does not stay to claim the spotlight. He simply steps quietly aside, so the music can keep moving forward. So what allows a musician to pass through rainbow, stand at pivotal moments in Ozzy Osbourne's career, work alongside Whitesnake, and then remain with Deep Purple for the long term, while rarely becoming the focal point? Don Airey's legacy is not built on image. It is built on reliability, a quality that may sound dry, but in rock is rarer than talent itself. He does not need a stage persona for audiences to recognize him from afar. He does not need a tragic backstory to forge a myth. He does not need to become a visual icon. What he leaves behind is a different kind of trace, a repeated presence at major moments, when music needs someone who will not let everything collapse. That legacy reveals itself in the way bands function when he is there. Songs have room to breathe. Guitars have a foundation to fly. Vocals have support to stand firm. Airey's keyboards do not compete for attention. They organize attention, distribute energy, and keep the structure from drifting when emotion rises. For many artists, legacy is a style that can be imitated. For Don Airey, legacy is a standard of arriving at the right moment, playing the right role, and leaving without creating chaos. In a rock culture that celebrates individuality, this is a fundamentally countercultural choice. Look at Deep Purple after 2002. The band did not need a revolution to survive. They needed stability, something that allowed the music to continue evolving without denying the past. Airey did not replace a legend with a copy. He replaced him with function, keeping the legacy operating in the present. That is how legacy lives, rather than being put on display. On a deeper level, Don Airey's legacy also lies in his invisible influence on later generations of musicians. Not everyone learns his technique, but many learn his attitude, that keyboards in rock are not meant to defeat the guitar, but to complete the picture. That professionalism can sustain a career longer than any image. That standing outside the spotlight does not mean standing outside history. In rock, those who stand in the light are usually remembered first. But those who keep the structure standing behind it are the reason the light does not collapse. Don Airey's legacy is not loud, it is durable. And because of that, it endures. Don Airey is not the face on the poster. He was never built as a visual icon. His name is not the one shouted first when the stage lights come on. But very likely, he is someone you have been hearing for a long time before you ever knew his name. An intro that opens up space, a chord placed in exactly the right position, a background layer that quietly shifts the emotion of an entire song. In those moments, Airey does not occupy the stage. He keeps the stage from collapsing. He appears where history needs precision more than glamour, where music needs structure more than ego. Rock is often told as the story of guitar gods, frontmen standing in the light, individuals larger than the bands they belong to. But that is only half the story. The other half belongs to those who understand that music is not a competition of personalities. It is the art of serving the moment, serving the song, serving the space, serving the listener's emotion, even when they do not know who is doing it. Don Airey never sought to hold history in his hands. He simply made sure history stayed held together, across eras, across generations, across songs, as rock continued forward without losing its foundation. And sometimes, the most enduring legacy does not lie in being seen the most, but in always being there at the right time, and then quietly stepping aside. If you love stories about those who stand behind the lights yet shape entire eras, follow Icons and Legacies to continue discovering the silent figures who have kept rock from ever collapsing.